And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is August the 20th, the 232nd day of this year. Just 133 days remain the year is over with, and we'll start a new one. It's National Bacon Lovers Day, World Mosquito Day, International Hawaiian Pizza Day, National Chocolate Pecan Pie Day. Yes, it's quite a day to keep in mind. Now we're going to see what interesting stories we have in the news because we do live in interesting times. Well, a Missouri judge has handed President Trump and the GOP a major redistricting win ahead of the midterm elections. He ruled that the state's referendum process can't be used to challenge congressional maps drawn by the legislature and allows a new GOP-friendly map to remain in place for November's midterm election. Cole County Circuit Judge Daniel Green ruled Wednesday that Missouri's constitutional referendum provisions don't apply to congressional redistricting enacted by the General Assembly. Sides with Republican Secretary of State Denny Hoskins in a closely watched fight over a Trump-backed map that helped determine control of the U.S. House. Green also ruled that Hoskins' decision does not to certify the referendum petition was lawful and ordered the Republican-backed congressional map remains in full force and effect for the 2026 general election. Plaintiff Richard Von Glahn appealed the ruling Wednesday evening, according to the court docket. The ruling preserves a map passed by Missouri's Republican-led legislature after Trump urged the GOP-controlled states to redraw congressional boundaries ahead of the 2026 referendum and the midterms. New boundaries are aimed at giving Republicans an opportunity to defeat Democratic Representative Emanuel Cleaver of Kansas City. Missouri's current 8-member House delegation consists of 6 Republicans and 2 Democrats. The map splits portions of Kansas City between neighboring Republican-held districts and stretches the remainder of Cleaver's 5th Congressional District east into Republican-heavy rural areas. About 59% of voters in the reshaped district are new to it, according to an Associated Press estimate. The Republican State Senator Rick Bratton won the GOP primary in a redrawn district earlier this month, where Cleaver was unopposed for the Democratic nomination. New boundaries are already used in Missouri's August primaries. Opponents collected thousands of signatures seeking to force a statewide referendum on the map, but Hoskins rejected the petition, arguing that Missouri's constitution doesn't allow congressional redistricting to be put to a referendum. And Green agreed, entering judgment for Hoskins and the Republican National Committee, National Republican Congressional Committee, and Missouri Republican State Committee, which intervened in the case. Well, we shall see what comes of the midterm. And now, what is this silly computer doing now? Okay, Iran taps financial lifeline. Russia arms as President Trump escalates crushing economic warfare. Tehran is deepening its financial military ties with Beijing and Moscow, forging a critical lifeline as it seeks to circumvent U.S. sanctions and weather Washington's renewed maximum pressure campaign, regional security analyst warned yesterday. As the U.S. continues to ramp up Operation Economic Fury, Iran, they say, has turned to non-Western blocs and alliances to unite further with Russia and China while positioning itself as a linchpin in a network that directly challenges American influence. The warning came as President Trump announced Wednesday what he called the most crushing economic operation ever taken against any country. He threatened sweeping consequences for nations and businesses to provide Iran with an economic lifeline as he seeks to further isolate Tehran. This will be economic warfare and isolation on an unprecedented scale, he said in a post shared on Truth Social. The Islamic Republic is looking to survive, but in order to survive, it needs to adapt, according to Ben Taleblu, Senior Director of the Iran Program at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, according to what he told Fox News. It needs to adapt not just to U.S. and Israeli military pressure, but this U.S. political and economic pressure. There's no doubt the Islamic Republic is looking to maximize its enmeshment with countries like Russia and China that have been subject to U.S. political and economic pressure in the past. BRICS, that's B-R-I-C-S, an economic bloc consisting of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and several recent expansion nations, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, a Eurasian political, economic, and security alliance led by Beijing and Moscow, have become key vehicles for Iran's outreach of late. President Trump has previously labeled BRICS policies anti-American. So we'll see what happens with that. Alina Habba shuts down speculation she could replace Caroline Leavitt as the White House press secretary. One of the betting favorites, Triple A's Caroline Leavitt, as White House press secretary, declared Wednesday she's not in the running for the job. The 28-year-old White House press secretary, fresh off paternity leave, announced earlier this month that she would end her tenure at the podium at the end of August to spend more time with her two young children. The speculation continued to swirl over who President Trump would tap to succeed Leavitt. Bettors on prediction market platform Kalshi began favoring Alina Habba for the role. And Habba, who served as senior advisor to the Attorney General for U.S. attorneys, was previously floated for the position after Trump won the re-election. Bettors on Kalshi gave Habba a 35% chance of being named Leavitt's replacement at the time before she publicly dismissed the speculation. It was Habba herself who threw cold water on the idea. She said she is flattered by the Kalshi odds, but I'm not running for any job, she said on X. However, I am getting a new one. I'd love for one of these anonymous sources to let me know first. Fake news remains the undefeated champ until I come at him. So we'll see who gets the job. El Sayed's agenda puts permanently changed America on the line in Michigan Senate race, according to GOP firebrand. Former GOP gubernatorial candidate Tudor Dixon sounding the alarm on her belief that Democratic Michigan Senate nominee Abdul El Sayed's opposition to Sharia law bans, association with far-left streamer Hassan Piker, and progressive policies to permanently change America. She said, "This is not, if this person gets it, how much damage they can do in 6 years," Dixon told Fox News. This is somebody who fundamentally disagrees with the Constitution and the founding of this country, and has come out and said the founding of this country was wrong, and he disagrees with this. This is somebody who wants to go into government to permanently change America. Dixon highlighted El Sayed's past opposition to a Sharia law ban, saying America needs to know where he stands. Worst thing that could happen to this country would be Sharia law coming into effect. She said this is a guy who's gone out and he's done speeches on why it's a terrible thing to ban Sharia law. That, to me, the average American is terrified of the idea of groups coming in and taking over our culture and saying they're going to change how we live and how women are treated. If they want to get into a government who sides with Sharia law, go to a Muslim country. Don't try to do it here. Well, a third body's been found in Minneapolis in 3 days as the police investigate a string of deaths. Police reported been finding bodies across Minneapolis, with the latest grisly discovery made near the city's Stone Arch Bridge. Fox 9 reports that the University of Minnesota Police Department found a body near the bridge, but hadn't revealed the circumstances leading up to that person's death. And the grim find marks the third body found in Minneapolis in 3 days. First body was found on Saturday, 6 p.m. in a wooded area near the East River Flats Park, which is near the Mississippi River. Police have identified the woman found Saturday evening as Carolyn Lynn Sogneson, 56, from Maple Grove, according to the Minneapolis Star Tribune. The obituary for the woman says the most loving, caring daughter, sister, and friend has left us too soon. Her struggle with mental health and the loss of her father was just too much. Second bodies found Sunday at 11:30 in the morning near the shoreline of Bidimakaska Lake. Bodies found in a severe state of decomposition, according to a statement from the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. It's unclear whether the three discovered bodies are linked to a crime of some sort. Well, a lot of unsolved deaths are coming to light recently. Well, the Idaho coffee shop owner defends ejecting a pro-life group from his business after backlash. Idaho coffee shop owner says he and his wife have received nonstop death threats after a viral confrontation in which he demanded a pro-life group leave his business and compared him to the Ku Klux Klan. Kristen Hawkins, president of Students for Life of America, posted a video to social media on Monday alleging that she and her group were ousted from Idaho Roasters and Driggs after owner Jim Sheehan learned they were holding a pro-life meeting. Hawkins told Fox News a group of about 15 people gathered at the cafe to discuss a prospective ballot measure that would legalize abortion up to 24 weeks in Idaho, where most abortions are currently illegal. Her 16-year-old son, Bear, a fellow with Students for Life, organized the gathering to recruit local volunteers. They also plan to discuss ways to help support moms and families in need in their rural neighborhood, according to Hawkins. Also, according to Hawkins, group members ordered food and drinks before sitting down, at which point Sheehan approached them and said they weren't welcome to host their meeting there. Video footage shows Sheehan telling the group to meet at the public library instead. Sheehan said in the video, "This is my place of business. I did a lot of work to get people on the ballot so women could have the right to choose in the state of Idaho. This is something I do not support, nor does my wife, and it's our business, so we have that choice." When Hawkins asked if he was kicking him out, Sheehan replied, "Did I make it clear I didn't want you here? It's like if the KKK asked to meet here, I'd say no," Sheehan explained in the recording. "In my world, it's the same sort of concept." Now, one monthly bill Americans can't avoid is quietly surging thanks to an emerging industry of data. Americans consume feel the artificial intelligence boom in an unavoidable place, their monthly electric bills. Research from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas finds the rapid growth of AI data centers could make electricity more expensive for households in the coming years. And researchers estimate existing data centers that have popped up all across the country in recent years have already pushed average wholesale electricity prices 2 to 6% higher nationwide, with even larger surges in areas where these facilities are concentrated. This used to take even more prominence as affordability, emerging technology, and the future of energy-sucking data centers becomes central to many American sentiments in the ballot box. Pressure in monthly bills could grow in conjunction with the AI boom. The preferred middle range scenario for researchers shows the cost increases of generating electricity to be 20 to 30% higher by 2028 compared to what it would be without these new data centers. That doesn't mean a family's electric bill is going to jump 20 to 30%. That figure is much more nuanced. Depending on its size, a single large data center can use as much electricity as a small city, according to estimates compiled by federal researchers. Well, Publix ditches long-time checkout lane rules and a major change for shoppers. Public shoppers may notice a change the next time they head for the express checkout lane. Florida-based supermarket chain has dropped the traditional 10-item limit from its express lanes, giving store employees more flexibility to manage checkout traffic and potentially reduce wait times. According to a spokesperson, to better serve our customers, improve checkout efficiency, we recently updated our express lane process to provide associates with greater flexibility in managing customer flow. Rather than adhering to a specific item limit, our focus is on reducing wait times and ensuring customers can be served as efficiently as possible. Signs at previously designated lanes for customers with 10 items or less are being replaced with signs that simply say Express, according to Maria Browse, Director of Communications for Publix. We piloted this change in our Miami division and have begun the rollout company-wide, keeping our customers and service top of our mind. Change does not mean Publix doing away with express checkout altogether. Instead, the supermarket's moving away from using a specific number of items to determine who should use the lane. And sometimes express lanes are the only things available. Hayden Panettiere's death is back in the news. DEA reportedly joins a probe into what happened to the late star. Drug Enforcement Administration reportedly joined the investigation into actress Hayden Panettiere's death. She died Sunday at the age of 36, found unresponsive and in cardiac arrest at an apartment in Greenville, South Carolina. Resuscitation efforts were unsuccessful in Nashville, and Remember the Titans actress pronounced dead. Preliminary autopsy results found no signs of trauma that contributed to her death, according to Fox News Digital. A police report obtained by Fox News Digital revealed Panettiere's on and off boyfriend, Brian Hickerson, and his brother Zach called 911 after finding the actress unresponsive. Hickerson later handed authorities a bag of medication Panettiere had been taken. Hickerson is among those at the Greenville Department where Panettiere was found, and authorities executed a search warrant at the residence, according to the report. Police also conducted a welfare check Wednesday at a South Carolina home linked to the Hickerson brothers, but nobody answered the door. Panettiere's death came just weeks after the actress spoke publicly about her past struggles with addiction and a difficult decision she made while seeking help. The New York native began acting as a child, landing a role in the soap opera One Life to Live at just 4 years old. Later appeared alongside Denzel Washington in the 2000 football drama Remember the Titans before becoming widely known for her role as Clara Bennett in NBC's Heroes. And unfortunately, she was taken much too soon. Lindsay Clancy prosecutors come across as tone-deaf, uncaring, and snarky, according to defense attorneys. If you're somebody who knows having thoughts about suicide, you need to contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK. Prosecutors at the Lindsay Clancy murder trial are coming across as tone-deaf to how jurors feel about the case, according to a criminal defense attorney. Lindsay Clancy, 36, faces 3 counts of first-degree murder and the death of her 3 children, Cora, Dawson, and Callan, all under the age of 6. They were found strangled at the family's Duxbury, Massachusetts home in 2023. Prosecutors concluded their case Monday morning, and Clancy's defense attorneys since begun presenting arguments, asserting she was in the grip of a postpartum psychosis when she killed her children. Donna Rutono, a criminal defense attorney, told Fox News she feels the prosecutors are being tone-deaf to the way jurors are feeling about the murder trial, citing specific examples. One of the main examples Rotuno cited was a moment from Tuesday when the Assistant District Attorney Shannon Buckingham asked Susan Clancy, Lindsay's mother-in-law and a Catholic, if she knew murder was a mortal sin. Susan Clancy offered no response to the question, prompting Judge William Sullivan to immediately call the sidebar and order that remark stricken from the record. Rotuno said the prosecution has so far come across as uncaring and snarky. I understand your job is to prosecute in a murder case, and you view this as a first-degree murder, Rotuno said, but in sort of ignoring the true emotion that this type of case invokes, and by ignoring it, you're really tone-deaf to the way the jurors feel about it. Well, I will say that murder's murder. You can put whatever bow you want to on it, it's still murder. CBP officers seized nearly 850 pounds of khat, that's K-H-A-T, packed into 12 suitcases after a flight from London. 2 travelers arriving from London allegedly packed nearly 850 pounds of khat into 12 suitcases before the massive hauls were uncovered by customs officers at a Maryland airport. U.S. Customs and Border Protection said the 2 U.S. citizens from New York arrived in Baltimore Washington International Thurgood Marshall Airport on August 13th and referred for secondary inspection. During the subsequent baggage examination, officers discovered what would appear to be a large quantity of tea leaves, which later tested positive for khat, or Katha edulis, according to CBP. Authorities said each traveler had 6 soft-sided suitcases filled with the material. The seized material weighed about 847 pounds and had an estimated street value of about $100,000. Men were released pending further investigation, according to CBP. Khat, also known as Abyssinian tea, an African salad that's typically grown in East Africa and the Caribbean Peninsula, is chewed for its amphetamine-like effects, according to CBP. Dried leaves can also be boiled to make a stimulant tea. According to the Drug Enforcement Administration, khat contains 2 central nervous system stimulants: cathinone, a Schedule 1 controlled substance, and caffeine, a Schedule 4 controlled substance. Anybody with half a brain should have figured out that it wasn't going to get past the inspection. Well, we got time for one more story. Alaska's real Senator Dan Sullivan stood up over a challenger. Alaska U.S. Senator Dan Sullivan moved on to general election after Tuesday's primary, outpolling, though not eliminating, Dirty Trick Dan Sullivan. The challenger, a retired federal employee and teacher of the sort who attends No Kings rallies, is suspected by most observers of being a confusion candidate meant to siphon votes in Alaska's open primary. He finished third because state rules send the top 4 vote getters to the general election. Both candidates are going to appear on the ranked choice ballot in November. As of the time of this story, Senator Dan Sullivan is a close second, Democratic Congresswoman Mary Patola in the primary voting, and the other Dan Sullivan was a very distant third. So I conclude the second Dan Sullivan is a Dirty Trick candidate, as described by Senator Dan Sullivan and others. Well, according to Alaska election officials, Daniel J. Sullivan Jr. initially sought ballot access as Dan Sullivan, although his voter registration records identified him as Daniel J. Sullivan Jr. The Division of Elections regarded that as evidence he wanted voters to mistake him for the incumbent. He also changed his party affiliation to Republican immediately before filing and never before been registered as a Republican. So Dirty Trick Dan Sullivan's campaign also had connections to a Democratic political consultant whose work history included supporting Democrats. Alaska election officials actually tried to remove Dirty Trick Dan Sullivan from the ballot, but the state Supreme Court ruled he could be on the ballot. And this week, Reuters reported the U.S. Department of Justice is investigating the campaign of the second Dan Sullivan. It has issued grand jury subpoenas as part of a federal probe into what could be a discussion of the shenanigans that have been going on in this election. Well, on that note, we've finished our news segment for this show. We're going to go back to our topic from yesterday's show, which was what's known as the Battle of Los Angeles, which took place in 1942. That's when what was initially thought to be a Japanese attack on Los Angeles morphed into what may well be a UFO incident. Over 1,400 anti-aircraft shells were fired at something floating over Los Angeles. No crashed Japanese airplanes were found. In spite of reports of paratroopers coming down, none were ever found. And although the eventual official story was that the object was nothing more than a barrage balloon that had come loose, a lot of folks disagreed with that version of the events, particularly those who believed they saw this object close up on the night in question. The 37th Brigade was relentless in its attempt to bring down this large object, but didn't have any success. The barrage of spent shells would fall over the entire area. In fact, no place was safe that night. A lot of folks were injured. There were even reports of deaths from falling anti-aircraft shells. According to newspaper reports, eyewitnesses described the sight of the UFO as a surreal hanging magic lantern. One of those witnesses was a volunteer air raid warden named Katie. Stated after being woken by a telephone call from the air raid supervisor, she looked out her window and saw this huge object just hovering over her house. She said it was huge. It was enormous. Practically right over my house. I've never seen anything like it before. Just hovering there in the sky and hardly moving at all. She said she had a clear view of the craft, and it shone a lovely pale orange as it remained motionless in the night sky. She also recalled seeing a group of American fighter planes attempt to engage the object, but each time they had to retreat, stating they were shooting at it, but it didn't seem to matter to the craft. Another witness, a retired anthropology professor named C. Scott Littleton, was 13 years old at the time of the incident. His father was an air raid warden and convinced that the actions were real. Littleton said he saw the craft as a distinct oval shape like a lozenge, and he witnessed anti-aircraft shells exploding all around it. Littleton also said he saw American fighter planes following this strange object and made its way towards Redondo Beach before it vanished from view. He also cast doubts on the official explanation of it being a balloon that came loose and floated to the Santa Monica area. That was the default solution of most UFO sightings in those days, just a weather balloon. Remember Roswell in 1947. This was 1942. According to this retired professor, the only area that housed such floating tether balloons was El Segundo. That meant that it would have had to have floated north to the Santa Monica Mountains where the object was observed, and then moved in a completely different direction to where it was last seen. Not the normal movements of a balloon by any stretch of the imagination. Shooting at area intruders were gunners of the 65th Coast Artillery Anti-Aircraft Regiment in Inglewood and 205th Anti-Aircraft Regiment based in Santa Monica. And this white cigar-shaped object took several direct hits but continued on its eastward flight. Up to 25 several UFOs are also seen by observers on the ground. Editor Peter Jenkins of the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner reported later, I could clearly see the V formation of about 25 several planes overhead moving slowly across the sky toward Long Beach. Long Beach Police Chief J.H. McClellan said, I watched what was described as the second wave of planes from on top of the 7-story Long Beach City Hall. He said, I didn't see any planes, but the younger men with me said they could. One experienced Navy observer with a powerful Carl Zeiss binocular said he counted 9 planes in the cone of the searchlight. He said they were silver in color. The UFO group passed along from one battery of searchlights to another and under fire from anti-aircraft guns, flew from the direction of Redondo Beach and Inglewood on the land side of Fort MacArthur, and continued toward Santa Ana and Huntington Beach. Anti-aircraft fire was so heavy we couldn't hear the motors of the planes, but we could see them. Reporter Bill Henry of the Los Angeles Times later wrote, I was far enough away to see an object without being able to identify it. I'd be willing to bet what shekels I have that there were a number of direct hits scored on that object, but it didn't show any signs of being hit. Another witness by the name of 8C later said, I'm a World War II veteran. Just thought I'd let you know that I was an eyewitness of the events back in February of 1942. I was 14 at the time, living in the Adams and Crenshaw area of Los Angeles. My family and I observed the entire episode through the large bay window of our home facing west, and the air raid sirens woke us up at 2 a.m. There was a period of silence following that, and then the thumping of an aircraft fire. Northwest sky was lit up with burning shells and searchlights. The action was moving south along the coastline. I remember distinctly the convergence of searchlights reflecting out the bottom of some kind of slow-moving objects, apparently flying in formation. They seemed to be completely oblivious and impervious to the shells exploding around them. I was quite the aviation buff back in those days, as I am now, but I have to admit I had a devil of a time trying to identify the objects. But with the awe and excitement and speculation of the movement, the bursting shells, the tracers, and things like that. He said, I was surprised in the days that followed to discover that with all that aggressive firepower, there was no evidence we had brought anything down. We then went to our south-facing kitchen and porch windows to observe the action where it culminated in the south. Ergo, the action followed the coastline. It could have been 2 or 3 or up to 6 miles away. I can't recall exactly since it occurred so long ago, but I strongly remember the searchlights converging on the bottoms of some reddish objects flying in formation. One man who'd been an eyewitness to a portion of the Battle of Los Angeles was able to add a bit of credence to the possible accuracy of the scattered reports that the Object hugged the mostly unpopulated ridgeline along the south side of the Santa Monica Mountains in an easterly direction as it headed toward its rendezvous with history. His name was William Bill Stout. He'd been a carpenter in civilian life and went on to build hopped-up Ford flatbed wooden hull speedboats after the war. Joined the Navy in his late teens or very early 20s after Pearl Harbor. Navy shipped him off to Point Hueneme and Point Mugu near Ventura, California, to help with the early stages of construction of the naval facilities they were building there. In the process, he met and started seeing a young woman that lived in a fairly isolated section of the mountains east of Hueneme and not far from the Paramount Ranch, an old movie western set used on and off over the years by various film studios. Late one night, after hanging around with the young woman, he was racing back to the base to make sure he didn't miss morning muster when on a small road leading up to the town of Aurora, his car got a flat tire. After changing the tire, he lit a cigarette and sort of leaned back in the tall weeds to rest his back for a few minutes. No sooner had he done so when some sort of giant object, a huge, gigantic flying thing, not much higher than the tops of the trees and not making a sound, but all the while blocking out a good portion of the night sky and most of the stars, slowly crossed overhead, curving toward the east after coming out of a more south-southerly direction. When he got back to the base, the place was in turmoil. People are running everywhere, forming into platoons, getting into the backs of trucks, carrying rifles, grenades, and gas masks. He was told the city of L.A. was under attack from the air. There was a statewide blackout, and everybody's going to spread out along the coastline to protect the city and county from invasion. And he said some trucks did leave, but most didn't even go anywhere, and by sunup, everything had pretty much calmed down. Eventually, they were told the whole thing was a fluke, to put the weapons away and go back to their regular business. Shortly after that, they sent to the South Pacific and pretty much forgot the incident. As far as describing the object itself is concerned, he said because there were trees on both sides of the road where he stopped and the fact that it made no sound, the object was practically on top of him before he ever saw it. He said at first he thought it might have been a blimp, except it was shaped more like a brick and seemed heavy like one too, although possibly curved somewhat rather than square-like and flat in the front like a brick. He also found out later at the time of the flyover there was an area-wide blackout. The thing is, not knowing about any blackout because it was so dark that night where he pulled over, he left the headlights on to reflect off the trees to give him as much light as he could in order to change the tire. He thought the object flew over his location on purpose because of the headlights, dim as they were, unbeknownst to him at the time, still provided the only real visible light source for miles around. In addition, his description of the object looking like a brick. This incident was an eerie-like reminder of another incident that happened a few months before. He was doing some sort of training for the Navy using an inflatable 7-man raft. His coming onto the beach in the raft with some equipment as several of his buddies guided it alongside in the water, holding on to ropes where the boat was swamped by a huge wave and flipped over. He was trapped underneath as the forward momentum of the water pushed him along, with his face and body being scraped by the sand and the rocks. Until the raft washed back into the deeper water and he was able to get out from underneath with the help of his friends, he thought he's either going to suffocate or drown. And he said when he first saw that giant flying object overhead that night, he thought it looked a lot like an upside-down life raft. And for a quick moment, he felt the same apprehension or fear that he felt when he was trapped underneath that life raft in the water, like he's going to suffocate or drown. And it was fairly easy to visualize if an airborne object of similar configuration, especially of any length, flew directly over the top of you at a slow, suffocating low altitude and you looked up. You might describe that object, at least from your viewpoint, as looking like an upside-down life raft. In June of 1966, one of only two operational prototype Mach 3 XB-70 bombers crashed. As a result, there was a short-term rash of publicity surrounding the plane in the press, including the release of photographs of a number of popular magazines and other sources that depicted the plane from a variety of angles and operational modes. Albert Nozaki, an eyewitness to the UFO over L.A., reports that although the XB-70 itself didn't resemble the object he saw that night in its totality, some photos that he did see during that rash of publicity after the crash struck him because of the way the plane was photographed and reminded him of the object he saw that night. The closest it captures the essence of what he saw was trying to say looked something like the appearance of an alien aircraft. Coming in off the ocean, one woman who lived along the strand that paralleled the beach said she had heard a ruckus going on outside. Sirens, guns firing, all kinds of stuff. So she went out to the strand only to see this thing a few hundred feet above the beach slowly glide overhead off the ocean. It didn't make a sound. As the shore batteries and searchlights continued to wreak havoc against the night sky, residents along the 40-mile stretch of coastline from north of Malibu to south of Palos Verdes had nothing but a front row seat to all the action. One of those residents, who's long since gone on to do intensive academic research into the mythological dimensions of the UFO phenomenon, was a young boy at the time, but now retired Occidental College professor of anthropology C. Scott Littleton, who I mentioned before. Lived along the coast in the Southern California oceanfront community of Hermosa Beach. In a recollection of the events that transpired that night, he wrote, "I was an eyewitness to the events of that unforgettable February morning in February of '42. I was 8 years old at the time, and my parents lived at 2500 Strand in Hermosa Beach, right on the beach. So we had a grandstand seat. While my father went about his air raid warden duties, my late mother and I watched the glowing object, which was caught in the glare of searchlights from both Palos Verdes and Malibu Pacific Palisades. Surrounded by the puffs of ineffectual anti-aircraft fires, it slowly flew across the ocean from northwest to southeast. It headed inland over Redondo Beach a couple of miles to the south of our vantage point and eventually vanished over the eastern front of the Palos Verdes Hills, what's today called Rancho Palos Verdes. The whole incident lasted, at least from our perspective, about half an hour, although we didn't time it at the time. With other kids in the neighborhood, I spent the next morning picking up pieces of shrapnel on the beach. It's a wonder more people weren't injured by that stuff, as we were far from the only folks standing outside watching the action." He went on to say, "In any case, I don't recall seeing any truly discernible configuration. Just a small, glowing, slight lozenge-shaped blob of light, a single blob. Only saw one object, not several, as some witnesses later reported. At the time, we were convinced it was a Jap reconnaissance plane, and that LA might be due for a major air raid in the near future. This was less than 3 months after Pearl Harbor. But that, of course, never happened. Later on, they all expected them, that is, the military, to tell us what was really up there that night. But that never happened either." Littleton was quite right about the object heading inland a couple of miles south of him over Redondo Beach, after apparently skirting some distance off the surf line from somewhere around El Segundo to Hermosa Beach. For those reasons, it just passed south of the Edison Electric Generating Plant Redondo rather than continue south around or past Palos Verdes Peninsula. It turned diagonally inland, headed to the south-southeast direction. Later reports stated the object had been flying at an altitude of between 8,000 and 12,000 feet, and if such was the case, with all the searchlights trained on it, you'd have thought at that altitude it would be easily seen coming. The craft was a huge, giant thing that loomed up over the hills, looking so big that when it crossed above our heads, you couldn't see the sides, just the bottom. And it took forever for the thing to finish passing over. And even though the object basically came straight on and crossed directly over the top of us, according to Littleton as he continued his statement, being out of the range of the searchlights and its actual shape was hard to discern against the upper night sky. His father, who in 1929 had actually watched the Graf Zeppelin land in Los Angeles at Mines Field, which is now known as LAX, and about 8 miles north of Redondo Beach, and even walked alongside and under that giant airship, the officer said the object that passed over him that night was as big, if not bigger, than a Zeppelin. Littleton said some of what he remembered about that thing because of its size, because it was huge. As he's grown over him, not totally sure how close it was to the actual size of the Graf Zeppelin in length at 776 feet, as his father's enthusiasm suggested. Littleton, though, and a highly competent fellow collaborator and editor of the UFO Chronicles, Frank Warren, using what seemed to be some sort of triangulation, have estimated the object's size was even longer. Using the black and white photo as a starting base, they conclude that from the width of the light beams at the point they reached the object, plus the knowledge that at least one of them had come from a searchlight battery in Manhattan Beach, 10 miles away, the others appeared to have come from Inglewood or El Segundo. Frank Warren concluded it must have been considerably bigger, that is, around 800 feet in length. Face on as he remembered it, the object wasn't round or circular like a zeppelin or a blimp, but wide and flat or slightly curved toward the center, concave-like across the bottom from the outside edges. Seemed bluntly wedged or possibly sloped toward the back and toward the top and the back, somewhat in the front, sort of like that triangular or boxy shape of present-day stealth aircraft, or more closely an upside-down pointed shovel. And from his vantage point, there was no sign of ribs or superstructure, no markings, alien hieroglyphic writing, insignia, or numbers, earth-based or otherwise. No openings, windows, portholes, hatches, seams, or lights that he could remember. No propellers, exterior motors, no sound. It had no wheels, wings, fins, or stabilizers either. Although it did have the capability to rise and fall in altitude and pick up and gain speed, as well as have the ability to go so slowly it barely moved. After all, it took well over 30 minutes to travel the 20 miles or so from Baldwin Hills to the ocean to Redondo Beach. Then when his father and neighbors attempted to follow it, the object was off at a fairly high speed, so much so their cars couldn't keep up with it. However, when it first turned in off the ocean, crossing the beach into Redondo proper, one of the first places it went was over the Happy Hour Cafe in the Strand. In February 1942, right there on the Strand, just south of the Edison steam generating plant, a huge giant object as big as a locomotive came in over the ocean and flew right over the top of the Happy Hour Cafe and the apartments standing there. One witness said she heard a ruckus going on outside, sirens, gun firing, all kind of stuff. So she went out to the Strand just to see this thing a few hundred feet above the beach glide overhead off the ocean. It didn't make a sound, and because of its length, it took forever to pass overhead. Well, in 1942, the Happy Hour Cafe is located at the beach level corner of one of the apartments, along with several other apartments owned by the infamous alleged South Bay Madam Fifi Malouf at 3 to 400 the Strand, Redondo Beach. Between the Edison steam plant and the Redondo Pier, the exact place the object is said to come in off the ocean. And the point past the Edison steam plant where the object turned inland toward the southeast, the ground generally slopes up from sea level at the beach to about 150 feet within a mile or so. The object must have already been flying at or near that height, as it didn't seem to need to change altitude much as it approached the level of the top of the hills. Clearly exposed to ground fire and the open-air broadside from both the north and south before it began hugging the rooftops of the houses built along the higher level ground. At a range of anything from the north to the south, the Hollywood Riviera battery was almost 2 miles away. That didn't stop it from opening up on the object for the short time it had in profile. It just wasn't effective. The rounds were falling all over the place before and beyond its path. While the officials may have been claiming there was nothing there, it was just generally nerves or weather balloons, and dismissed any observations of civilians. A lot of the civilian observers were very close as it passed over him, and that only could detect an object, they could see details as well. Littleton's statement continued on. As he said, on the night of the flyover, from where he stood in the dirt alley behind his house, and oil wells began to rise up out of the fields, had a perfectly clear and unobstructed view of the back of this object. So said people often want to know if the rear of the craft had any exhaust ports or rocket-like thrust openings, and the answer is no, at least none that I remember. However, his father said when he tried to catch it, coming almost broadside, although well below and somewhat behind, we could see what looked like 3 distinct, possibly 4 narrow red arms, like openings in the side toward the back, describing them as looking like shark gills, only glowing. Littleton said, I saw nothing like that. Matter of fact, I'm not sure what the motive power of that object was. I do know, even though its size was likened to a Zeppelin, it didn't act like one. Zeppelins are lighter than air machines, and there's a certain physical and psychological buoyancy to them, both in reality and in perception. This object seemed more like a battleship. There was something heavy about it. Thing is that it made almost absolutely no sound. Totally silent, which is odd because almost everything I ever saw that moved and was that big, locomotives, airplanes, ships, all made lots of noise. The only other thing that stood out about the object was that it left a very slight but distinct odor trailing off behind it, such as the electrical smell of a transformer after a long period of use. After the object passed overhead in its wake, the air reeked with an odor very similar to that. Some minutes after it crossed over Redondo Beach and his father lost track of it by not being able to keep up with it, the object was out over the agricultural fields that existed in those days, a few miles inland, east and south of the beach cities. That same night, Albert Nozaki was helping guard a friend's field against vandals that had been ruining crops. Nozaki had an interesting sighting that night. He said, approaching me well above the field from the west, silhouetted against the slightly lighter night sky, was a fairly huge, dark object coming straight toward me at a fairly quick pace. First, it seemed as though it would take a path off to the right of where I was standing, but before it reached me, it just barely began turning flatly toward the south, almost as if in a controlled drift. By then, I was just under the edge of the object that went over me, with the center off to my left, continuing its turn and eventually disappearing in the southern night sky with all that time gaining altitude. It was huge and dark and very long and wide, with no lights or signs of windows. Although it didn't have any protruding wings like on an airplane, the object's outside edges curiously curved down. As well, other than feeling a slight vibrational hum in my chest as it passed overhead, the object made absolutely no sound. Nozaki, apparently drawing on his experience in the field that night in 1942, designed the terrifying Martian flying machines seen in the 1953 movie War of the Worlds. Nozaki said he incorporated some of the ominous-like aspects of the object he saw that night, such as the curving down contours, and into his War of the World craft, wanting to capture some of the fear he felt as the real-life dark object came toward him, as though he was going to be clutched up by it. And so, too, how it mysteriously remained aloft, apparently with some sort of technology or power we didn't have. Another eyewitness, William Bill Stout, that we talked about earlier, says at the exact same time something crossed overhead above him in the mountains near Agora, a huge, gigantic flying thing not much higher than the tops of the trees, and not making a single sound, but all the while blocking out a good portion of the night sky and most of the stars. Slowly crossing overhead, curving toward the east after coming out of a more south-southwesterly direction. He says the object slowly crossed overhead, which means it reduced its speed to a crawl. To have crossed overhead where the eyewitness saw it, it would have had to turn inland somewhere around Point Duma. The giant object skirted the south side of Santa Monica Mountains toward the east along Ventura Boulevard, only to turn south in a gap in the mountains about halfway between the southern edge of the San Fernando Valley. Turning south, the object crossed over Baldwin Hills and turned westward toward the ocean, coming out over the aircraft plants near El Segundo Tank Farm. And from there, it went south along the coast, turning back inland somewhere past the Edison plant, Redondo Beach. Then the anti-aircraft guns opened up at 3:06 a.m., 45 minutes after it disappeared. That is, when it showed up again, not on radar, but visually and behind the sea facing anti-aircraft guns. Smart move on their part. It was anti-aircraft guns from the 4th Anti-Aircraft Command that opened fire against the giant alien craft. The unit involved under the aegis of the command was the 37th Coast Artillery Brigade, under which the 65th Coast Artillery Regiment, located in Inglewood, and the 205th Coast Artillery Regiment, located in Santa Monica, were the initial active participants. And at the time, both regiments' armament consisted of 3-inch and 37-millimeter anti-aircraft guns, and it was a combination of those guns and those surrounding batteries that expended nearly 10 tons of ammunition that rained down over Los Angeles and the surrounding cities during the appearance of this UFO. At higher elevations, the 3-inch guns and the 1.5-inch shells of the 37-millimeter guns made no visible impact. As the object turned south along the surf line near El Segundo and headed toward Redondo Beach, it lowered its altitude to parallel the beach just above the ocean with still no ill effect by the fire. Just after passing the Edison plant, it turned diagonally inward toward the south-southeast, crossing almost directly over the Happy Hour Cafe. Barely staying above the low-lying hills, it crested along Garnett Street, dropping to the south side of the hill along Torrance Boulevard and crossing over the 300 block of Lucia Street. Then gaining altitude, it headed out over the oil fields and agricultural lands beyond. So could it be that the diagonal turn inland just past the Edison plant was a design move and done so because of what was jutting out into the ocean just a short distance from the generating plant? I'm talking about the Redondo Beach Pier. And installed at the end of that pier were two 155 millimeter guns, not the small 3-inch or 37 millimeter guns installed elsewhere, but huge guns that fired 6-inch shells and diameter projectiles. The object seemed to have had the ability to withstand the anti-aircraft rounds without incident, but the 155 millimeter rounds at such a close range from both guns in tandem might have hurt it. Same is true when the object first turned south along the surf line near El Segundo and headed toward Redondo Beach and lowered its altitude. The reason it skirted just above the surf line at a fairly low elevation was because sitting between El Segundo and Redondo Beach and the city of Manhattan Beach were two of the most formidable weapons it would have encountered along its path, even more than the 255 millimeter guns in the Redondo Beach Pier. In the center of the Manhattan Beach, just a few blocks inland off the ocean, were two huge 8-inch railway guns mounted on specially built flat cars sitting on a spur track laid just for those guns. And those guns could easily fire their 500-pound projectiles for up to 20 miles. Unlike the Redondo guns, they were able to rotate all the way around in a full 360 degrees. They were not just able to fire an object so close and just above the beach, or even if they did, everything in their path between the end of their gun muzzle and the beach would have been pulverized, so the craft was able to just slip on by. Also, the alien craft's decision to make the diagonal turn over Redondo Beach just prior to reaching the pier, then cutting across the flatlands and passing in behind the sea-facing 16-inch coastal defense gun and placed at Fort MacArthur wasn't such a bad choice either. A single hit by one of their 2,240-pound projectiles with a range of 26 miles most likely would have been the end of the object. An alien craft flew over Redondo Beach County in 1942. And the picture published by Steve Lacy proved it. Something very odd happened in the early morning hours of February 25th, 1942. This is from a Battle of Los Angeles photo enhancement by Steve Lacy. That aircraft flew over L.A. County and sparked an air raid alert. Searchlights and guns were locked onto that craft for about an hour, and that alert was unlike any other. Now, we've all seen pictures of the military action in Iraq, and pictures of batteries of anti-aircraft guns firing in what looks like random patterns are familiar to most of us. Well, the pictures published in the L.A. Times in a story about the Battle of Los Angeles clearly shows a nighttime defensive response to an air raid. But the situation is quite different from what was shown from Iraq. The men firing the guns weren't desperately searching the sky trying to find a target. They had it in focus the whole time. And that picture may just be about the most convincing piece of evidence of the alien craft. With a little effort using Adobe Photoshop, Steve Lacy was able to clear up the image into something clearly showed a classic saucer-shaped craft, right in the center where all those searchlights were aimed. Then he enlarged the picture and adjusted the brightness and contrast using the levels tools. Well, the picture clearly shows a saucer-shaped aircraft in the area highlighted. The area outside the highlight appears to be clouds of smoke from several large explosions that are being illuminated by the lights. And if you look closely at the explosions, they don't look like they're actually coming in contact with the craft. A witness told LA Times reporters the bombs exploded in the rings around the craft. That could be because the craft had shields that are very similar to the shields used by imaginary craft in Star Trek. Red highlights are added to clarify what witnesses were looking at. Coincidentally, it seemed to mark the place where those shields seemed to be having an effect. Well, now there was also a photographic print obtained by Frank Warren that was made from the original negative. He did a photo analysis. Several different versions are presented in an effort to understand the nature of the object. The photos make it appear quite evident that there was an object at the center of the searchlights. On the caption under the photo read, "Seeking out object. Scores of searchlights built a wigwam of light beams over Los Angeles early yesterday morning during the alarm." This is taken from the story. The picture was taken during a blackout, shows 9 beams converging on an object in the sky near Culver City. Blobs of light which show at the apex of the beam angles were made by anti-aircraft shells. And to get the true negative image brightness, it's necessary to scan the original negative and adjust the gamma relation between the film image density and the light which made the image to match the gamma development. Typically 1, but they may have pushed the film to a higher gamma to get faint images. That may well be information on the shape of the object, which is not discernible from the print because apparently the exposure level of the object is quite high, and so the image may well be into the range of brightness saturation on the print. And if that's the case, if the print image is well saturated, no amount of analysis will dig out the totality of brightness information contained within that negative. Well, there are quite a few explosions, which probably didn't happen all at once. So that exposure could have been for several seconds. And the fact that the beams basically don't get past the object, some faint evidence of beams above the object, whatever was at the beam convergence must have been optically quite dense. If there was a lot of smoke swirling around the volume of air illuminated by the beams, you'd see variations in beam brightness. And there are variations. Well, so how large was the object? Well, in the studies of the photos, they had to know the distance of the camera from the beam convergence and the focal length of the camera. They could calculate the approximate size of it. That required knowing what portion of the city the object was over, where the cameraman was, and the altitude of the object. An alternative method is to estimate the diameter of a spotlight beam at some distance from the spotlight and use that width as a reference as well. There was a research article by Dr. Louis Elterman that reports research in the later 1940s in which he used an Army searchlight to probe the upper atmosphere in order to determine the vertical distribution of dust in the atmosphere. Well, he estimated the searchlight was being 5 feet diameter with a divergence of about 1.25 degrees or about 20 milliradians. That means the diameter, the distance from the mirror would be about, rather than going through the calculations, at 1,000 feet, the diameter would be about 25 feet. According to beam, wasn't uniformly bright across its diameter, so the effective diameter might be closer to 20 feet. So we're talking about a large item floating over Los Angeles. So due to the photos that were taken that night and later published actually proved the existence of alien presence and advanced technology on Earth. Well, the Battle of Los Angeles does make a very convincing argument for the presence of alien craft in our skies. And the fact that something not of this Earth slowly flew over LA County is very clear. There were hundreds of thousands of witnesses to the craft as it traveled apparently without being in any hurry, while our military tried very hard to knock it out of the sky. And once the craft had slowly traveled out of range of our guns, the battle was over. Now, since Pearl Harbor had happened only a few months before, it was easy to believe the Japanese had made the flight. Now that theory simply doesn't make any sense. If the Japanese anti-aircraft were immune to anti-aircraft guns, then the war would have taken a very different turn. And even all these years later, no country has aircraft to continue to fly without any apparent damage after being hit with even one anti-aircraft shell. Although there's been rumors the U.S. has just recently perfected the use of force fields in its latest stealth fighters. In 1942, such was not the case. And this aircraft wasn't hostile. If the pilots of that craft had wanted to hurt somebody, they certainly had a chance. So there's no way to tell whether that craft was armed or not, but if humans had designed a craft that could take such punishment, they would have designed it to be able to carry weapons. Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. Clearly, the evidence shows there was something inexplicable in the skies over LA that night. We're going to have one more show about it tomorrow. So until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.